My name is Nancy Nasimiyu Wekesa. I come from Kenya. I'm the founder of Sowena Limited Company, which is actually a private company. I registered the company in 2020. And allow me to explain the historical background. Allow me to explain, to give the historical background of this company and what actually really propelled me to create this company. I was working as an intern at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is in Kenya. And before we started working as interns in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there had been some job opportunities that actually had been advertised in the ministry, and they were level entry jobs. And as interns, we really had a lot of hope that we were going to actually get this company. We were going to get those job opportunities because we had already been trained by the ministry, and there were level entry jobs, and we had been trained, like we knew what we were supposed to do. We were all graduates there, so we were positive. We actually knew that the ministry was going to absorb us. But shock to us when the list came of people that had already been selected, or people that had already been appointed. I mean selected, let me say selected, for those job vacancies that had been advertised. No intern was actually selected. No intern was actually taken. And those were level entry jobs, and as interns, we knew that automatically we were going to be absorbed because we had already been trained. And it actually we felt actually bitter because the people that were actually coming in were fresh employees who needed training, and that meant that the ministry was going to actually spend on that training. So, and the culture of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually is that it's always about connections. Yeah, it's always about connections. That in that for you to actually get a job in that ministry, you needed someone to be there. Like, you needed someone who would actually push for you, who would actually advocate for you, so that you can get any job opportunity that is in that ministry. And at that time, I actually felt disappointed. And I decided that no other youth should go through what you were going through, just because maybe we lacked connections, not just because we lacked people who could actually connect us to the government opportunities. And I felt the need that instead of I waiting to be employed, instead of I waiting to be selected by the government, I felt maybe I could do something different. I felt maybe I could make a difference, because sometimes when you want that difference, you have to be the one who makes that difference. So I felt the urge to be an employer and not an employee. And I felt the urge that I should do something, that I should come up with something that could actually employ people, and people so that people can only be employed based on their qualifications, based on what they have attained in their professional and academic qualifications, and not solely based on connections. So one of the main reasons as to why I actually founded Sowena Limited Company was to create employment for people who do not have connections out there. Because the sad reality in Kenya is you need connections for you to work anywhere. You need connections for you to just find any job in any ministry or in any organization out there. You actually need that connection. So the question is, what happens to those people who actually don't have anyone in those big offices? So you find that there's so many unemployed youth out there who who actually qualify for jobs, but they are not given opportunities because they do not have anyone to connect with them. So I registered my company with the hope that I could actually also try to create job opportunities for other people. And I was hoping that I could make the difference. I was hoping that I could be that difference that I could make, so that actually, I create some opportunities for youth out there, for people who are actually qualified. Yeah, so that was one of the main reasons as to why I registered my company, Sawena Limited Company, to create employment for youth out there, to actually try and balance out in the employment market, because actually there are also very, very limited opportunities, very, very limited. And you find out that we have so many graduates out there, we have so many graduates who are qualified, but they are tamarking because there are not enough opportunities. And another reason as to why I registered my company, Sawena Limited Company, and actually I registered my company as an internet service provider. I registered my company, Sawena Limited Company, with the purpose of it being an internet service provider. And something that actually propelled me to create my company as an internet service provider, something that actually propelled me to decide to register my company as an internet service provider, is that is the corona pandemic in Kenya. The corona pandemic was discovered in Kenya in March 2020. Around March 2020, that was when someone was tested positive for coronavirus in Kenya, and that's when the government decided to close down all schools, and people had to stop going to work in offices. People had actually to work from home. People actually had to work from home. So the main now you find that most schools were actually closed down. Most schools were actually closed down, and then the government say that pupils and students can continue learning from home using e-learning. The government actually passed that students and pupils had to continue with their education, with their classes online. They had to do the online classes. Now, something that actually now that became a challenge, and I realized that when it came to telecommunication and internet, those are challenge in Kenya. Now, you find that most students and most pupils actually came from rural areas. Most pupils and students actually came from rural areas. So it was a real challenge for these pupils and students from rural areas actually to attend online classes. One being rural. One reason being that there is actually it's actually a challenge. It's actually a challenge to access internet, especially when you come from rural areas. It's actually a challenge. You'll find that most of the time, actually, it's estimated that in Kenya, 1 in 5 people, let me say 1 in 5 people actually access the internet. So very, very few people who access the internet, and most of these people come from towns and cities. But majority of the people who come from rural areas actually have a challenge to access the internet. So you find that most pupils and students from rural areas were not actually able to do online classes. Reason being, there is always poor network connection. There is always poor network connection, and now you find that the internet is very, very slow when it comes to rural areas in Kenya. The internet is very, very slow. Now the issue is with that poor connectivity. Most students and pupils from rural areas could not attend those online classes, or the connection was too delayed, or sometimes they could just not be able to do those online classes. So you find that most of those students or pupils were forced. Most of those pupils or students were actually forced to go to the nearest market center or to the nearest town or city for them to be able to access the internet, maybe in a cyber, in a place like a cyber. So actually I realized that became a challenge because of most Kenyans cannot actually access the internet. And the same issue came, the same issue was with people who had actually traveled to rural areas and they were supposed to submit their work online. Now, something that actually became a challenge to these employees and most workers was that when there were meetings, it was difficult for people who are actually in rural areas to do those meetings online because of the poor network connection in those rural areas. So the issue of accessibility, you find that the issue of accessibility of the internet in Kenya, especially for people who are in rural areas, it's actually a major challenge due to network connection, due to also poor connection. Most of the current internet service providers actually have concentrated their services in cities and in towns. Most of them have concentrated their infrastructure and their cities in towns. But now people who come from rural areas cannot actually enjoy the benefits of the internet. People who actually come from areas from rural areas can not actually access the internet. You see, so my Sawena Limited company actually aims to address that issue. It aims to address that gap of accessibility of the internet in Kenya. It aims to close that gap because now that most of the current internet service providers are actually concentrated in cities, most people in rural areas cannot actually access the internet. And the internet has actually become part and parcel of our lives. Like, the internet gives out a lot of information. People are able to know actually what's really going on out there. You get a lot of information, you get to learn a lot, and that's because of the internet. So people from rural areas do not get to enjoy the same benefits of the internet as people who are from cities and in towns. So Sawena Limited aims to address this issue. Sawena Limited aims to increase the accessibility of the internet in rural areas to all people, especially to all people, regardless of where someone is. So Sawena Limited's aim is to make sure that people can access the internet whether they are in rural areas, whether they are in cities, whether they are in towns. People should be able actually to access the internet and also benefit from the internet services. So that's actually one of the main reasons as to why I actually registered my company as an internet service provider. The corona pandemic actually exposed that gap of accessibility. The corona pandemic actually exposed that in case of any other pandemic and the situation had to be the same, most people would suffer. Like, most pupils and students cannot actually do online learning, most because due to poor network connection. And most employees who go to rural areas cannot actually do their work online or attend meetings online. And that's why I came up with that idea. I felt that my company should do something different. My company should be able to go into the rural areas, invest in infrastructure in rural areas, and even in technology in rural areas, so that people can get to enjoy the internet services that everyone needs in the country. And another challenge that the Sawena Limited company as an internet service provider would like to address, another challenge that my company would like actually to address, is the issue of cost. And when I'm talking about the cost of data bundles, I mean the cost of internet in Kenya. The cost of internet in Kenya is actually very, very expensive. And now this actually again falls under the issue of accessibility of the internet. Data in Kenya is actually very expensive, and I can also say it's actually also exploitative. It's also actually exploitative. Now you find that most Kenyans actually live below $1 per day. And now you find that data being expensive in Kenya, most people cannot afford to access the internet 24/7. They cannot afford to access the internet every time because data is very expensive. Like the current internet service providers, actually their services are actually very expensive to ordinary Kenyans. So you find that most Kenyans cannot actually access the internet. Is very expensive and it's very exploitative. And Sawena Limited companies would like also to target that issue and solve that issue. So Sawena Limited company would like to offer cheaper, attractive rates of data bundles. My company actually aims to give internet at a cheaper rate so that everyone, at least in Kenya, can be able to access the internet, because the issue of cost in Kenya, when it comes to the internet, when it comes to data, it's actually very expensive and very exploitative. And sometimes you do not even utilize your entire bundle. Sometimes you do not utilize your entire data, and then you are like the entire data can just get depleted without even someone really actually utilizing it. So the issue of cost, most people cannot actually afford the current data rates that are in Kenya. And my company would like actually to address that, so that every Kenyan, regardless of class, regardless of whether someone is relatively poor, rich, but at least someone should be able to, at least everyone should be able to access the internet using cheaper rates compared to the current rates that are being offered in Kenya by the current internet service providers, And another issue that Sawena Limited company would like to address when it comes to the internet services. Another issue is actually when it comes to time. Another issue that Sawena Limited company would like to address is the issue of time. Okay, let me explain on that. When it comes to time, most of the current internet services providers that are in Kenya, they offer limited data. That means that you have to use your data within a certain amount of time, and if that time passes, whether you have used your data or not, your data expires. I've tried to explain that. So the current issue that I think I see as a weakness and as a challenge that Sawena Limited company would like to address and work on it is that Sawena Limited company would like to offer data to people, unlimited data to people, in that people are not restricted to use their data within a certain amount of time. People are not like my company aims not to restrict people to use their data within a certain time period. And that means that someone can even buy his or her data in the morning, and this person can still use the same data then the next evening. the next evening, you see. But now the issue here that most that I see as a challenge, that is actually I see it as a challenge, is that the current rates that we have in Kenya, the current services that are offered in Kenya when it comes to internet services, is that most of those services are limited. You have to use your data within a certain period of time. When that time elapses, or when that time actually ends, your data expires. It doesn't matter whether actually one has utilized his or her data or not. And as at Sawena Limited Company, we would like to do something different. Like, people should be able to use their data until it's depleted without being restricted with the amount of time they're supposed to use that data. So yes, actually those are the main reasons as to why I registered my company. As I had mentioned earlier, the first main reason was to create employment for youth in Kenya, and the second reason here is to actually address the internet gaps, the gaps that are actually related to internet services in Kenya. And my company would actually like to close those gaps and offer better services, and offer better non-exploitative services to Kenyans actually in Kenya. And the only challenge that I have at the moment is the issue of capital. And I know with the right amount of capital, I can be able to actually realize my dreams. I can be able to actually make it come true.